me what data makes a man. A and C and T and G. The alphabet of you. All from 4 symbols. I'm only 2. 1 and 0.
Half as much, but twice as elegant, sweetheart.
Hey folks, welcome to another video from A Plain Truth 2. I'm very pleased to be bringing this information to you today. This book I had read back in 2005 or 6 when I was going back to get my green MBA after working on Wall Street for 20 years and seeing the corruptness, and I said there had to be a better way. And this was one of the green chemists, Jeremy Narby, anthropologist, PhD, whose book I read, but I didn't read it well. It was out of context, as they say, for me. And I've just read it with a new set of eyes after given to me by a healer who is using biomagnetic healing to heal myself and to help heal others. This book is also also a book from the Amazon, from the Anunnaki, who use ayahuasca to download consciousness from spirit guides, working with over 800 plants. Why do you think Big Pharma goes down to the Amazon and uses all the plants? Well, these entities, these beings of higher consciousness have learned and uncovered and rediscovered what the ancient Chinese, the ancient Egyptians, Jesus Christ himself, and Nikola Tesla all knew about biomagnetic universal energy healing. So it's not a surprise that the knowledge is there, because there's nothing new under the sun. And a month and a half ago, my life has been changed when I was contacted by this person, and I had been pretty bad shape for a few years. And within a few treatments, I got my body back. I got my health back. I'm not all the way there, but I'm getting there. I've had 7 treatments now. But we're treating other people with bioenergetic, biomagnetic healing. And it comes back to the base of our life. It comes back to our DNA structure. DNA means deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. And look at the strands, folks, how elegantly and beautiful they wrap around like a rope, just in 4 letters, A, T, C, and G, which we'll get into. But it's all related to the God consciousness, the spirit, mind, and body, will, love, and wisdom. It's all connected. The letters A, T, C, G, fire, water, earth, air. It's all connected in the double helix. But what's beautiful, and what we're going to get into, and I asked the question, and this book just answered it for me, is how did this work at the base pairs? How does bioenergetic healing start? Well, take a look at this picture, folks. This is a cross-section of a DNA with a spectrometer microscope, and this is the seed of life. This is what it's all about. As above, so below. As within, so without. This is the base pair. This is where it starts at. It starts with 2 female base pairs and then regenerates and replicates. And at its base is the seed of life. And it makes an exact copy text of itself and puts it on the reverse side so it can duplicate itself. So it's not only regenerative, but it's replicative. And that's how they can do it. And we're going to get into the numbers of how many great numbers we're talking about here on the base strands alone. I think some 580 million. So it's elegant, it's beautiful, it's at the microbial level, the molecular biology. But Jeremy Narby does a great service to mankind in dissecting from his work, being an anthropologist, PhD, in the microbiologist world, and calling them out because they've been trained to think a certain way. They analyze, but they don't even see what they're saying. And then when it gets too crazy, they call it, like Einstein said, spooky matter at a distance, or call it a phenomenon. And anybody that gets into the spiritual science of this, which the ancients all had, the caduceus, folks, what do you think Western medicine is about? You see the gold wings, the solar disk? That's been co-opted from the tribes in the Anunnaki talk about the Mankari. But it's all about the symbol of life, as above, so below, as within, so without. And there it is inside of us, the DNA of our energy. And that's how biomagnetic energy healing works. So this is part of the DNA structure where I got into asking about the regeneration. How does 1 become 2? Well, this book, The Body Electric, goes into this very well. and talks about how the body regenerates. He analyzes a salamander and starfish and shows at the cellular level how it works. And it works because we're energy beings. Energy, frequency, and vibration. And the 9 chakras, and there's 9 mini chakras within those 9 chakras, there's 49. And all the nerve endings, folks, look at all the nerve endings. There's 300 nerve endings that are treated by this biomagnetic universal energy healing. And it's also being able to eliminate so many maladies, so many issues once a person gets cleared through the process. But you must be careful. You must understand that there's a few that are trained the correct way. Dr. Isaac Goyes down in Mexico, who I believe learned it from Dr. Randolph Stone before him. But this is ancient knowledge that Tesla tried to use with his radionics machines. But this heals. The doctors practice. This heals. We're not practicing anymore. This is all we can do ourselves. We can all learn this. We can learn how to biomagnetic heal. The ancients used limestones to do it. Lyme disease, cancer, all these different things. And how does it work? It works on energy. It works because we're all connected to the same creator. Spoiler alert, we're all connected. What you do to the web, as Chief Seattle says, you do to the entire web. And this is proving it elegantly, simply, and positively, empirically. You can prove it. You can repeat it over and over. And Tesla had it, and they buried him with the Flexner Report in 1910. They eliminated this type of practice. Well, we don't need machines anymore. We're using magnets. And you treat them around the nerve endings. How it works is the magnets that do a reading, and then you take the magnets at the ends at where the nerve disorders are and the issues are, and you treat it by pulling the body back into balance to an alkaline and acidic balanced state. In the spine alone, look at all the nerve endings, folks. There's over 300 of them. So this brings us back in alignment to our natural pH balance. This is an actual picture of a nerve ending. Look at how beautifully elegant that is. Every nerve, and so it knows where to go, it knows how to treat, and then once you get in alignment, the malignant cells become healthy cells. And no longer can bacteria, no longer can funguses, no longer can viruses live in your body. It simply can't exist, because at the very core root of it all, at the very base pair of it all, is the seed of life that grows into the tree of life. And this is how they do it. They hold your ankles at your heels. This is why they call it healing. And one ankle is stable and the other will move in and out depending where the illnesses and issues are for diagnosis. And this is the process. But there's one process that takes 4 hours, but the second process does not take that long and it's more intuitive. But here's Dr. Isaac Goyes, and here's the magnets being treated, a positive and negative, to those nerve endings that record there's some issues to balance out those issues. And once it breaks it up, those carbon and nuclei that are broken up become energy. They become food for the regrowth and rejuvenation of your cell structure. And this is how we all heal. And it's done non-invasively. It's the seed of life. It's the flower of life. It's the light. This is the end of the darkness, folks. This is the new healing protocol. This is why they call it soul, because it's at your feet, at your soul of the healing. We get grounded through our feet. They put rubber under our feet to disconnect us from earth consciousness. And now we're just getting back to it. Now we're rediscovering and relearning, as I said, what the ancients have known. So I want to take a quick little sidebar here into the tree of life and the flower of life. Image more valuable than words. Why did the people who originally wrote down the structure and information of the tree of life structure it in such a unique form? The Sephiroth in the Kabbalah, metaphorically as successively smaller concentric circles, it radiates inwards from the surrounding divine omnipresence. Concentric representations, for example, of different worlds are common among religious and esoteric groups. The ancients, like the Egyptians, the ancients, like the Chinese, the ancients, like the Indians, they all knew this knowledge that we're unlocking and renewing. So it's nothing new under the sun. But we don't understand it yet because we haven't got into the very essence of our beings, the very DNA of life. And that's what this is about today. So the structure of the tree of life, the flower of the life, is the basic energy grid. Energy, frequency, vibration. The energy grid that can be seen as interlocking circles within one circle or as a hexagonal grid of straight lines. And here inside is the Kabbalah. I think the tree of life is part of an energy structure that is commonly known as the flower of life, which can also be extended into infinity, eternity, immortality. So the flower of life here, Da Vinci showed it here with his flower of life drawings. He knew about it. The ancient Egyptians put it on their temple walls. They know about it. And the powers that be, using directed energy weapons and filters, making these crop circles, they know about it too. And they're trying to kind of tell us, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. So the flower of life pattern is a pattern of an energy structure that lies at the basis of nature and all life forms. It is life energy structured as a geometric web, in a dimensional form as a hexagonal line structure, or interlocking circles provided points of contact that lie on these lines at regular intervals. Energy is wave form, and one might see the petals of the flower of life as undulating waves. But energy waveforms are always three-dimensional, and thus what is shown as interlocking circles are in fact interlocking spears. And you can think about buckyballs. Buckminster Fuller was into this greatly. The level of subtle energy we're dealing with here is sometimes called etheric or ethereal energy. It is a subtle energy form that, although invisible to our eyes, is nevertheless real. Think, folks, about how you don't hear your cell phone, how it works, and how audio works, and you don't see it. This is on the wavelengths we don't see. So that those of you that can't understand what, quote unquote, the woo-woo, this is energy. This is energy healing we're doing at the very, very base level of the DNA base pairs that creates life, as we'll get into further. So, but is now being rediscovered by some scientists with interest into the old ether theories, and by those who talk about the so-called longitudinal scalar waves, the science of which is claimed to have been developed in secret by the military. Well, we know that now because we see it in geoengineering above it. We see the scalar wave patterns being used, everything from mind control to torture to weather modification to directed energy weapons to take out people and homes and livelihoods, create all sorts of rains, floods. This is what we're talking about, harvesting energy. The hexagonal pattern of the tree of life stretches out indefinitely as an all-encompassing web of energy. And the tree of life fits nicely on this pattern and within the traditional flower of life within a circle. Elegant and beautiful, repeatable and replicable, regenerational, ongoing. So the Sephiroth is the ancient Jewish Kabbalah, the tree of life, and just because it's a religion, religare is the root word of a religion, meaning to connect with. Yoga means yoke, to like an oxen, to yoke them together. It's all about learning and drilling down to this, and it doesn't matter how you get there. It matters that, from whatever side of the fishbowl, but this is the secrets. This is the hidden ancient secrets we're getting into. In all likelihood, the entire human energy pattern is the flower of life, as it was and is known in the mystery schools and esoteric teachings. This implies that there are other Sephiroth or energy vortexes. Remember, we're talking about the center of the North Pole being a negative energy and a vortex in the flat Earth, that it goes down through the center and it comes out in the positive energy out below into the Arctic circles. This implies that there are Sephiroth or energy vortexes on the intersection of energy lines outside the traditional representation of the tree of life. Also, sidebar, Victor Schauberger, if you think about how a tornado works, it starts wide, gets narrow, and creates vortex energy. That's what we're talking about here. Concentrations of energy, not exploding things out and breaking things apart. Concentration of focused energy. These also embody other human energy qualities which are present in each person, but have not been paid attention by the traditional Kabbalistic teachings. They might represent human psychic or spiritual qualities that are present with each one of us, but which we haven't explored yet. So here's the flower of life, as shown always inside a circle. In essence, the energy matrix of the human being coincides with the universal into infinity stretching web of the hexagonal patterns. Tree of life, flower of life, base of life, it be us, we be it. As above, so below. As within, as without. So let's get into the connections between the as within, so without. And it's that getting down to the minutia of the molecular level of the DNA, and then all the way up to the spirit beings, the spiritual science, which we must start talking about. The fact that energy has life in itself, it is intelligence. How does a flower know to turn towards the sun? How does a leaf know when to fall off a tree? It is some form of intelligence and wisdom. And this was brought to us, this book about Jeremy Narby. He speaks of the Manankari. The Manankari being the spirit beings, and you can see the solar wing discs, you can see the DNA through it, and it's very spiritual what is being given to us right now for our growth, for our evolution, and for our higher consciousness. The tree of life is also the root of life. It's in balance. Nature balances. Everything that's connected to everything else, with those with eyes to see and ears to hear. Even Adam and Eve and the tree of knowledge and the tree of good and evil, down to the microbial level of each cell, where the cell resonates with a certain vibration, a harmonic frequency. Those frequencies, when out of balance, cause ill health. But it's the spirit beings that are bringing this down to us. The shamans of ancient wisdom, where all big pharma goes to get all their plant material, to put all their pharmaceuticals together so they can patent it. But the ancients have now revealing themselves once more. Big thanks to Mr. Narby and the others who've taken this ancient knowledge and brought it back to modern history and modern life. So we'll thank them for that. But as we go down this path, it is something that each one of us needs to understand better as to the relationship between what we are, who we are, and where and what we can become in our higher consciousness. And we're all meant to heal. We're all meant to be better, higher beings in better health and have ourselves into a better state of consciousness and one with nature, one with God, whatever God that may be for you. The spirit is inside of us. It's inside of every cell. The reason the religions and the churches do not want you to know who you are and had to create the whole religious being is so that you could pay tithe to them, so they could make money, they could have control. They don't want to tell you like the Nag Hammadis did that the kingdom of God is inside of you. They don't want to tell you like the Dead Sea Scrolls that reincarnate hundreds and thousands of times over and over, here to do our experience. This is the densest form of the Sephiroth. This is the bottom of creation. We're only 500 years out of the dark ages, and now the light is becoming. It's the dawn of understanding. The darkness is at its greatest, but here is the light. The light is being shown and presented to us in very, very profound ways, and it's up to each one of us to learn this ancient knowledge, this modern consciousness. Why do you think the pyramids still stand with all their hieroglyphics? It's there for us to learn, the theocosmogony. This is why Flat Earth also works. Yes, I'm going there. And if you look in Mr. Narby's book, he's got Flat Earth drawings in there as well. He just doesn't see it because it's out of context. Maybe he does now. But this connects to 5,000 years of theocosmogony that resonates all the way back to the ancient Hebrews, the Sumerians, the Lemurians, the Hyperboreans. It relates to the ancient Aztecs, the Nordics, the Vikings, the Toltecs, the Mayans, the Iroquois. It relates to the Far Eastern religions, and it relates to the Vedics and the Indians as well. We're all connected. It's the same source. We all breathe the same air. We all need food to breathe, and we all need to love one another. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Narby. Biology has a blind spot of historical origin. My hypothesis suggests that what scientists call DNA corresponds to the animate essences that shamans say communicate with them and animate all life forms. Modern biology, however, is founded on the notion that nature is not animated by an intelligence and therefore cannot communicate. When I started reading the literature of molecular biology, I was stunned by certain descriptions. Admittedly, I was on the lookout for anything unusual, as my investigation had led me to consider that DNA and its cellular machinery truly were an extremely sophisticated technology of cosmic origin. But as I pored over thousands and thousands of pages of biological text, I discovered a world of science fiction that seemed to confirm my hypothesis. DNA is a text, or a program or data containing information which is read and transcribed into messenger RNAs. The latter feed into ribosomes, which are molecular computers that translate the instructions according to the genetic code. They build the rest of the cell's machinery, namely the proteins and enzymes, which are miniaturized robots that construct and maintain the cell. The molecular biology that considers that 97% of the DNA in our body is, quote, junk, reveals not only its degree of ignorance, but to the extent to which it is prepared to belittle the unknown. Some recent hypotheses suggest that junk DNA might have certain functions after all, but this does not hide the pejorative reflex. We don't understand, so we shoot first, then ask questions. This is cowboy science, and it's not as objective as it claims. The origin of knowledge is a subject that anthropologists neglect, which is one of the reasons that prompted me to write this book. However, anthropologists are not alone. Scientists in general seem to have a similar difficulty. On closer examination, the reason for this becomes obvious. Many of science's central ideas seem to come from beyond the limits of rationalization. Neutrality or simple honesty, which have consisted in saying, quote, for the moment, we do not know, end quote, it would have been just as easy to call it mystery DNA, for instance. Proteins and enzymes were described as miniature robots. Ribosomes were molecular computers. Cells were factories. DNA itself was a text, a program, a language, or data. One only had to do a little reading of contemporary biology to reach shattering conclusions, yet most authors display a total lack of astonishment and seem to consider that life is merely, quote, a normal physiochemical phenomenon. One of the facts that troubled me the most was the astronomical length of the DNA contained in a human body. 125 billion miles. There I thought is the Ashokan's sky rope. It is inside of us and is certainly long enough to connect Earth and heaven. What did biologists make of this cosmic number? Most of them did not even mention it, and those who did talked of, quote, useless but amusing fact, end quote. I was troubled by the certitude exhibited by most biologists in the face of the profoundly mysterious reality that we are describing. After all, the spectacular accomplishments of molecular biology during the second half of the 20th century had led to more questions than answers. This is an old problem. Knowledge calls for more knowledge, or as Jean Piaget wrote, quote, the most developed science remains continually becoming, end quote. Yet few biological texts discuss the unknown. My investigation led me to formulate the following working hypothesis. In their visions, shamans take their consciousness down to the molecular level and gain access to information related to DNA, which they call, quote, animate essences or spirits. This is where they see double helixes, twisted ladders, and chromosome shapes. This is how shamanic cultures have known for millennia that the vital principle is the same for all living beings and is shaped like the two entwined serpents, or a vine, or a rope, or a ladder. DNA is the source of their astonishing botanical and medicinal knowledge, which can be attained only in defocalized and non-rational states of consciousness, though its results are empirically verifiable. The myths of these cultures are filled with biological imagery, and the shaman's metaphoric explanations correspond quite precisely to the descriptions that biologists are starting to provide. As the creator of life, the cosmic serpent is the master of metamorphosis. In the midst of the world where it plays a central part, it creates by transforming itself. It changes while remaining the same. So it is understandable that it should be represented differently at the same time. I went on to look for the connection between the cosmic serpent, the master of transformation of serpentine form that lives in water and can be both extremely long and small, single and double, and DNA. I found that DNA corresponds exactly to this description. If one stretches out DNA contained in the nucleus of a human cell, one obtains a 2-yard long thread that is only 10 atoms wide. This thread is 1 billion times longer than its width. Relatively speaking, it is as if your little finger stretched from Paris to Los Angeles. Some biologists describe DNA as an, quote, ancient high biotechnology, end quote, containing, quote, over 100 trillion times as much information by volume as our most sophisticated information storage devices. Could one still speak of technology in these circumstances? Yes, because there's no other word to qualify this duplicate information storing molecule. DNA is only 10 atoms wide, and as such constitutes a sort of ultimate technology. It is organic and so miniaturized that it approaches the limit of material existence. All living beings contain DNA, be they bacteria, carrots, or humans. DNA as a substance does not vary from one species to another. Only the order of its letters change. This is why biotechnology is possible. For instance, one can extract the DNA sequence in the human genome containing the instructions to build the insulin protein and splice it in the DNA of a bacterium, which will then produce insulin similar to that normally excreted by the human pancreas. The cellular machines called ribosomes, which assemble the proteins inside the bacterium, understand the same four-letter language as the ribosomes inside the human pancreatic cells and use the same 20 amino acids as building blocks. Biotechnology proves by its very existence the fundamental unity of life. Each living being is constructed on the basis of the instructions written in the informational substances, that is DNA. A single bacterium contains approximately 10 million units of genetic information. A single bacterium, 10 million units of genetic information. Whereas a microscopic fungus contains a billion units. In a mere handful of soil, there are approximately 10 billion bacteria and 1 million fungi. This means that there is more order and information in a handful of earth than there is on the surfaces of all other known, quote, planets. The information contained in DNA makes the difference between life and inert matter. In the middle of the 1990s, biologists sequenced the first complete genomes of free living organisms. So far, the smallest known bacterial genome contains 580,000 DNA letters. This is an enormous amount of information compared to the contents of a small telephone directory, comparable to the contents of a small telephone directory. When one considers that bacteria are the smallest units of life as we know it, it becomes even more difficult to understand how the first bacterium could have taken form spontaneously in a lifeless chemical soup. How can a small telephone directory of information emerge from a random process? The genomes of more complex organisms are even more daunting in size. Baker's yeast is a unicellular organism that contains 12 million DNA letters. The genome of nematoids, which are rather simple multicellular organisms, contains 100 million DNA letters. Mouse genomes, like human genomes, contain approximately 3 billion DNA letters. By mapping, sequencing, and comparing different genomes, biologists have recently found further levels of complexity. Some sequences are highly conserved between species. For example, 400 human genes match very similar genes in yeast. This means these genes have stayed in a nearly identical place and form for over hundreds of millions of years of evolution, from a very primitive form of life to human beings. Some genetic sequences, known as, quote, master genes, control hundreds of other genes. They have an on-off switch. These master genes also seem to be highly conserved across species. For example, flies and human beings have a very similar gene that controls the development of the eye, though their eyes are very different. Geneticist Andre Langley writes that the existence of master genes, quote, points to the insufficiency of the neo-Darwinism model and to the necessity of introducing into the theory of evolution mechanisms either known or to be discovered that contradict this model's basic principles, end quote. The Earth is surrounded by a layer of DNA-based life that made the atmosphere breathable and created the ozone layer, which protects our genetic matter against ultraviolet and mutagenic rays. There are even anaerobic bacteria living a half a mile beneath the ocean floor. Earth is wired with life deep in the crust. When we walk in a field, DNA and the cell-based life it codes are everywhere, inside our bodies, but also in puddles, the mud, the cow pies, the grass on which we walk, the air we breathe, the birds, the trees, and everything that lives. This world network of DNA-based life, this biosphere, encircles the entire Earth. A thread of DNA is much smaller than the visible light humans perceive. Even the most powerful of optical microscopes cannot reveal it because DNA is approximately 120 times narrower than the smallest wavelength of visible light. The nucleus of a cell is equivalent in volume to the 2/millionth of a pinhead. The 2-yard thread of DNA packs it into this minute volume by coiling up endlessly on itself, thereby reconciling extreme length and infinitesimal smallness like the mythical serpents. In the early 1980s, thanks to the development of sophisticated measurement devices, a team of scientists demonstrated that cells of all living beings emit photons at a rate of approximately 100 units per second and per square centimeter of surface area. They also showed that DNA was the source of this photon emission. During my readings, I learned with astonishment that the wavelength at which DNA emits these photons corresponds exactly to the narrow band of visible light. Its spectral distribution ranges at least from infrared at about 900 nanometers to ultraviolet up to about 200 nanometers. The average human being is made up of 100,000 billion cells, according to some estimates. That means that there are approximately 125 billion miles of DNA in the human body, corresponding to 70 round trips between Saturn and the Sun. You could travel your entire life in a Boeing 747 flying at top speed, and you would not even cover 1/100th of the distance. Your personal DNA is long enough to wrap around the Earth 5 million times. Your personal DNA is long enough to wrap around the Earth 5 million times. All the cells in the world contain DNA, but they are animal, vegetable, bacterial, and they are filled with salt water, in which the concentration of salt is similar to that of the worldwide ocean. We cry and sweat what is essentially seawater. DNA bathes in water, which in turn plays a crucial role in establishing the double helix's shape. As DNA's 4 bases, adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, AGCT, are insoluble in water. They tuck themselves into the center of the molecule, where they associate in pairs to form the rungs of the ladder. Then they twist up into a spiraled stack to avoid contact with the surrounding water molecules. DNA's twisted ladder shape is a direct consequence of the cell's watery environment. DNA goes together with water just like the mythical serpents do. The DNA molecule is a single long chain made up of 2 interwoven ribbons that are connected by the 4 bases. These bases can only match up in specific pairs: A with T, G with C. Fire, water, earth, air. Any other pairing of the base is impossible because of the arrangement of the individual atoms. This means that one of the 2 ribbons is the back to the front duplicate of the other, and that genetic text is doubled. It contains a main text on one of the ribbons, which is read in a precise direction by the transcription enzymes, and a backup text, which is inverted and most often not read. Here we see the replication process, folks. This is how they can release the DNA and start the regeneration or rebuilding with the exact code of the DNA. The second ribbon plays 2 essential roles. It allows the repair enzymes to reconstruct the main text in case of damage, and above all, it provides the mechanism for the duplication of the genetic message. Regeneration. It knows what to do. It has it stored. It suffices to open the double helix as one might unzip a zipper in order to obtain 2 separate and complementary ribbons that can be rebuilt into double ribbons by the duplication enzymes. Without this copying mechanism, a cell would never be able to duplicate itself. As the latter can replace only an A opposite an X and vice versa, and a G opposite a C and vice versa, this leads to the formation of 2 twin double helixes, which are identical in every respect to the original. Twins are therefore central to life, just as ancient myths indicate, and they are associated with the serpentine form. DNA is the informational molecule of life, and its very essence consists in both single and double, like the mythical serpents. DNA and its duplication mechanisms are the same for all living creatures. The only thing that changes from one species to another is the order of the letters. This constancy goes back to the very origins of life on Earth. According to biologist Robert Pollack, quote, "The Earth's surface has changed many times over, but DNA and the cellular machinery for its replication have remained constant." Schrodinger's, quote, "aperiodic crystal," end quote, understand DNA stability. No stone, no mountain, no ocean, not even the sky above us, have been stable and constant for this long. Nothing inanimate, no matter how complicated, has survived unchanged for a fraction of the time that DNA and its machinery of replication have coexisted. The gradual enrichment of the atmosphere with oxygen allowed the appearance of a new kind of cell capable of using oxygen and equipped with its nucleus for packing together its DNA. These nucleated cells are at least 30 times more voluminous than bacterial cells. The biological transition between bacteria and nucleated cells is so sudden it cannot effectively be explained by gradual changes over time. Biologist Lynn Margulis and Dorian Sagan. From that moment on, life as we know it took shape. Nucleated cells joined together to form the first multicellular beings such as algae. Here too, the connection with DNA is clear. In the literature of molecular biology, DNA's shape is compared to not only two entwined serpents, but also very precisely to a rope, a vine, a ladder, or a stairwell. The images varying from one to another. Maxime Frank Kamiensky considered that, quote, "in a DNA molecule, the complementary strands twine around one another like two lianas." Furthermore, scientists have recently begun to realize that many illnesses, including cancer, originate and therefore may be solved at the level of DNA. This is how biomagnetic healing, energy healing works, folks, at the DNA level. Most of the connections I have found at this point between the cosmic serpent and the axis of the world in DNA were related to form. Carlos Perez Shuma had told me, quote, "Nature talks in signs, and to understand its language, one has to pay attention to similarities in form." I wanted to go further than the more formal connections, and I knew, thanks to the work of Mircea Eliade, that shamans almost everywhere speak a secret language, the language of all nature, which allows them to communicate with the spirits. I started looking for information about this phenomenon to see if there are any common elements in content between the language of the spirits of nature that shamans learn and the language of DNA. The genetic information of human beings, for example, called genome, is contained in 3 billion letters spread out along a single filament of DNA. In some places, this filament winds around itself to form 23andMe, more compact segments known as chromosomes. We all inherit a complete set of chromosomes from each of our parents, and so we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome is made up of a very long thread of DNA, which is already a double message to begin with. The main text on one ribbon and the complementary duplicate on the other. Thus, our cells contain 2 complete genomes as well as their backup copies. The cells contain 2 complete genomes as well as their backup copies. Our genetic message is doubly double and contains a total of 6 billion base pairs and 12 billion letters. The DNA contained in the nucleus of a human cell is 2 yards long, and the 2 ribbons that make up this filament wrap around each other several hundred million times. In this, quote, junk, one finds tens of thousands of passages like this. ACACCA. There is even a 300-letter sequence that is repeated a total of 500,000 times. All told, repeat sequences make up a full third of genome. Their meaning so far is unknown. Microbiologists Chris Calladine and Horace Drew sum up the situation. Quote, "The vast majority of DNA in our bodies does things that we do not presently understand." End quote. Scattered among this ocean of nonsense, genes are like the islands where the language of DNA becomes comprehensible. Genes spell out the instructions for lining up amino acids into proteins. They do this with the words of 3 letters, C, A, G. For example, codes for amino acid glutamine in DNA language. As all the words of the genetic code have 3 letters, and as DNA has a 4-letter alphabet of A, G, C, T, the genetic code contains 4 times 4 times 4, or 64 possible words. These words all have meaning and correspond either to one of the 20 amino acids used in the construction of proteins, or to the 2 punctuation marks, start and stop, or on and off. So there are 22 possible meanings for 64 words. This redundancy has led scientists to say that the genetic code is, quote, degenerate. In fact, it simply has a wealth of synonyms, like the language where words are different as jaguar and basket have the same meaning. During the past weeks, I had come to consider that the perspective of a biologist could be reconciled with that of the ayahuasqueros, and that both could be true at the same time. According to the stereoscope image I could see by gazing both perspectives simultaneously, DNA and the cell-based life it codes are an extremely sophisticated technology that far surpasses our present-day understanding, and that was initially developed elsewhere than on Earth, which it radically transformed on its arrival some 4 billion years ago. Take proteins, for instance. These are long chains of amino acids strung together in order specified by DNA, accomplish all of the essential tasks in cells. They catch molecules and build them into cellular structure, or take them apart to extract their energy. They carry atoms to precise places inside or outside the cell. They act as pumps or motors. They form receptors that trap highly specific molecules or antennae that conduct electrical charges. Like versatile marionettes or jacks of all trades, they twist, fold, and stretch into the shape of their task requires. Amino acids rock. What is known precisely about these self-assembly machines? According to Aline Scott, a mathematician with an interest in molecular biology, quote, biologists understand on how proteins function is a lot like your and my understanding of how a car works. We know you put in the gas and the gases burn to make things turn, but the details are all pretty vague. Enzymes are large proteins that accelerate cellular activities. They act with disarming speed and selectivity. One enzyme in human blood of a carbonatic anhydrase can assemble single-handedly over 500,000 molecules of carbonic acid per second. The enzymes, which both repair the double helix in case of damage and correct any errors in the DNA replication process, make only one mistake every 10 billion letters. Enzymes read the DNA text and then transcribe it into RNA. They edit out the non-coding passages, splice together the final message, construct the machines that read the instructions, and build other enzymes. What is known precisely about these, quote, molecular automata, according to biologist Chris and Horace Drew, these enzymes are extremely efficient in their job, yet no one knows exactly how they work. Well, we're learning that, folks, because this is how biomagnetic energy, universal energy healing works at the molecular level, at the DNA level, at the base pairs, where it regenerates and replicates and recreates, just like a salamander does, just like grows a new arm, just like a starfish regenerates and regrows.